Hello and welcome to Season 2 of the Coming Down to Earth with Spirit podcast with me, David Hale. Like with Season 1, we will continue talking about all things spiritual in a real and down-to-earth way. So I hope you can join me on my podcast journey so you can learn from my own spiritual journey and experiences with spirit in order to help you on your own spiritual journey and development. So join me now as we get into this episode. Well, hello everybody. Thank you very much for tuning in again to this podcast. I hope you're all really well. And this episode is the first episode in the Knowledge series, which is a series where I'm going to talk about different subjects and topics to do with mediumship and spiritual world and whatever, just to give you something to think about, something to learn from as well, to hopefully apply to your own knowledge bank or to apply to your own learning if you are indeed developing as a medium. So in this episode, we're going to talk about getting names in readings. So what I mean is, as a medium, is it important that we give names in a reading? And then also from the client perspective, is it really important to receive a name during a mediumship reading? Now, the first thing I will say is, from my perspective, I don't think giving a name is the be all and end all of a reading. But I understand from a client perspective that for some clients, to receive a name is almost that little bit of validation for them that is their loved one coming through from spirit. So I understand that. To add to that, I have had clients say, and I've had people say to other mediums as well, why can't spirit just give you a name? Why can't they just say, my name is Bob, and just get it out of the way and just identify themselves at the very beginning? And to an extent, I would maybe agree, but we wish it was that simple, and it just isn't. Because we need to remember one thing, and that is that your spirit people are not in a physical body. They don't have the physicalities that we do to give a name. They don't have a voice box or a tongue or a mouth and all those things that can give you the name physically. Remember that when mediums are communicating with spirit, we're communicating with them on almost like a telepathic thought-based process where they're dropping things into the mind which are usually symbolic. So it's not as simple as them just having a conversation with us like I would sit down with you and have a conversation with you face to face. It's not the same. They're communicating symbolically. So a name is not always going to be clear as day, right? We might get an initial or a phonetically sounding similar name, but depending on the spirit person and how they communicate, you're not always going to get a name. And to add to that, if spirit don't feel like then giving a name is important, then they're not going to give it, because they want to give other bits of evidence to prove that it's them. Because look, if we look at names in general, and this is why I don't feel the names are the be all and end all of a reading, because a name is not unique. We all have one. All of your spirit family in the spirit world, they all have a name. That's a common thing. But what's not so common is their characteristics, their personality, which only you would know. It could be a memory they bring up that is a memory that only you have with them. Those are the things that are unique. A name isn't, unless the person in spirit had a particularly uncommon, unusual name. I remember doing a reading for a lady online. I couldn't see her. It's a Facebook Live thing. And I was connecting and she was saying, yeah, this applies to my friend who sat next to me. I thought, oh, okay. And then I said to her, I keep hearing the name, it sounds like Dominica. I know it wasn't Dominic. I know it's a female name, Dominica, which is not common to me. And it turns out that was the name of a friend that was sat next to her watching the live feed. So yes, that could be great evidence, but that's because I do get names now. I remember at the very beginning of my development, I never got names. It just wasn't something that I was able to pick up. I was getting other bits and pieces of really good evidence, but names just weren't coming through. But as I have developed further within my mediumship, I now do get names. But that's just how I personally work, but not all mediums work that way. So it's really important that when a client, yourself, whoever goes for a reading, it's to be open-minded and to listen to the evidence that's coming through. As long as you've got good evidence, you don't need a name, because it makes no difference. If the medium has been able to describe your loved one from the way they looked, their personality, their characteristics, memories that you have with them, important anniversaries and whatever else, then that name is not going to make a difference to you at all, because you already know who it is coming from the spirit world that wants to make the communication. And as I said before, spirit know what evidence they want to give the medium. The medium is not pulling the information from spirit. Spirit are feeding the medium the information that they want to give you to prove their existence in the spirit world. So again, if spirit don't feel like giving you a name is important, then they're not going to. They're going to give you those things that only you remember. Again, which is the memories, their description, their personality, their character, what the house might have looked like inside, the wallpaper on the walls, or whatever it might be. That is the evidence. A name is not going to be the most important part of it. But now, if we look at it from a medium's perspective, as many of you will probably be aware, that all mediums work differently, right? So as I say, I do get names from spirit, and anyone that's watched me do a live feed on Facebook, or watched me do a service online or in a church or a centre, or even if you had a one-to-one with me, you'll know that names, most of the time, names do come through. But as I said before, that never used to happen. But that's just how I work. I do pick up on names. But there are some mediums out there who don't get names. One of my friends, is a gorgeous friend, George, who's known as George the Medium, who's based up in Scotland. He does publicly say that he doesn't work with names. He just doesn't pick up names from spirit. That doesn't mean that I'm better than him because I pick up names. Not at all. He's a fabulous medium. It's just that's not how he works with spirit. And same with me, when it comes to how someone passes, I know some mediums out there who are really good and 100% spot on when they're picking up how someone in spirit passed away, whether it was cancer of this, cancer of that, Alzheimer's, or whatever it might be. They're very good at pinpointing that. But I don't get that. Spirit doesn't work with me like that. I wish they did sometimes, but they know how to work with me. But I very, very rarely pick up how someone passed. I might get the feeling of it was a long illness, or it was a very quick, shocking passing, or an accident or something. But I very rarely get exactly what it is that they passed of. But that's just how I work. So again, it doesn't mean that medium over there is better than me because they can pick up the information. It's just we're picking up on different things. We're working with spirit in our own unique way. So again, when you go for a reading, it's just being open to what information comes through, as long as it's evidential to you and you know who the communicator is from spirit. And if we look at the skeptical side of people, there are the skeptics who will say, I won't believe you, or I won't believe this is real until I get a name till you give me a name of that spirit person. Well, if you don't work with names, then you're going to have a very long wait for that, because you're not going to get it. But then also, even if we did give a name, the next thing they will say is, oh, that's a common name. That's, anyone could say that. You could just make that up and give me a name because I've asked for it. So really, in those situations, as mediums, we can't win. So what I would say is, if you get a name, great, say it. If you don't, then you don't. It doesn't make you a worse medium just because you don't get a name. But then also, one of the worst things you can ask a medium is ask them for a name. Because the way mediumship works, and without going into any details of the mechanics of it, for example, when I'm reading, when I've got spirit communicating with me, I am fully attentive to what they're saying, how they're making me feel, what they want to put in my mind. And my logical brain completely goes out the window. I'm not thinking about what I'm saying. I'm just saying what comes in. And many people who have watched me live will see that there are many occasions where I forget my words, or I'm trying to think of a word and I can't, and it's a very simple word, but I can't remember it. And that's because my logical brain has gone out the window and I'm paying attention to what Spirit's saying. However, if a client asks a medium for a name, what can happen is that medium's logical brain switches on and then goes and starts searching for all these different names they've ever known in the mind. That name isn't coming through organically or from Spirit. It's the logical brain that's pulling that name in, and therefore it doesn't become evidential any longer because the medium's brain is now searching for it because you've asked for it. So the last thing you want to do is ask a medium for a name. If it comes through, just allow it to come through. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. We just have to accept that that is the case and just accept all of the other evidence that that medium has worked hard to give you. But then also you've got to think that Spirit, if they do give a name, it's not always going to be a name that's directly linked to you. A name could come through which was the name of your grandfather's best friend or the next door neighbor. It's not always going to be a name that you're going to associate with straight away. So unless you are really clued up on the names of people in your family who have lived, over the past 50 years, then you're not necessarily going to be able to take the name anyway. I mean, even last night I did a reading for a lady and she understood every single thing that I said. And I said, your grandma's here, and she's given me the name Francis. And she went, I don't know about that. I'll have to ask then. And it wasn't until I got further on during the live feed that I was doing where she commented back and said, I've just checked, and Frank was her granddad's name. So, unless you are really clued up at that particular minute, during that reading, you're not necessarily going to be able to take all the names anyway. And unless you then actually go and research after the reading, then you're never going to know if that name actually fit you or not. So, and obviously when you're in a reading and you're having a load of evidence thrown at you, whether it be names or other bits and pieces, it can be a bit overwhelming. So again, in those situations, a name is not going to make a huge lot of difference because you're still trying to process everything else that's been thrown at you in the reading as well. But I think lastly, let's just talk about, maybe this is a slight side note for any skeptical people listening. There may be, there may not be. But let's talk about common names because, again, if you come back to skeptics, where I said earlier on that some skeptics I have heard say, I'm not going to believe it unless you give me a name. And then when you do give a name, they'll just say, oh, it's a common name. Anyone could have said that. If we take common names, right, I don't know, like the John, William, Mary, etc., etc. If we go back in time, and I've been doing my family tree for 14 years, right? So I've got a whole list I've got nearly over 1,000 people in my family tree so far. So I've got all the names there that I can see. Back in those days, like my grandparents' time, their parents' time, names were commonly handed down. And depend on your culture, where you come from, certain names are common. Like on my mum's side, the name John, I can't tell you how many times that name is handed down. William on my dad's side, I can't tell you how many times that name's been handed down. Mary, Elizabeth, all those names are common names. So I know there might be some mediums out there, especially if you're new and you're starting and you get the name of John come in, or Paul or William, you might be slightly afraid to say it because of that attitude of, well, that's a common name. Well, if you're being given that name, you're being given it for a reason. So just say it. So these people who say, oh, it's a really common name. Well, yes, it is, because I'm doing a reading for a person of a certain age where in their family, that name's going to be handed down God knows how many times. So I'll just give you an example. On my dad's side, my name is David Peter Hale. My dad's name is Stephen Peter Hale. His dad's name was Peter William Hale. His dad was William Charles. His dad was William Charles. His dad was Charles. So names are handed down, and yes, they might seem quite common, but that's just what it is. They're just common names, right? But on the opposite of that, you might think that David is a common name. If I look at my siblings, Gary and Laura, you might think they're common names. But having done my family tree, they're not common names in my family. So if I went to a medium and they gave me the name of Gary, yes, it's my brother's name, but there's no one else in my family that's ever been called Gary, going back to 1800 and something on both sides of the family. From what I've seen, he's the only Gary in the family, and Laura is the only Laura in the family. So to me, those names are not common. So it swings and roundabouts. So we just need to just keep that in mind, right? So if you are given a common name, that's because it belongs in your family somewhere. And if you're not given a name, it's not the end of the world, right? Because a name's a name. So just need to keep these things in mind when you're going for a reading, and if you're a medium doing these readings. It's not beating yourself up if you don't get a name, but just because that person in front of you wants it. And I always say to them, if spirit don't want to give you a name, you're not getting it, and that's it. I'm not going to pull a name out of them, because spirit are in charge of the readings. That's what we need to remember as well. Spirit are in charge of the communication. As a medium, we rely on spirit to give us the information that they think is important, that for them to give to the person, to their loved one that I've got sat in front of me. And if they don't give me a name, then they're not going to get a name. I'm not going to make it up. It is what it is. But I feel like that's all I have to say about getting names in mediumship readings. As always, I thank you all for listening. Look after yourselves, and I'll speak to you all soon. Well, there you have it. That's the end of this episode. I hope you enjoyed what you heard and you found it interesting. There are plenty more episodes to come, so stay tuned, and I'll speak to you all soon.